Hey, welcome to Beer Christianity. It's me, Jonty. I've never started it like that in my fucking life. Why am I?
Well,
It's me, Jonty. Hey, welcome to Beer Christianity. My name's Jonty.
I'm Laura.
And I'm Paul.
That's good. I mean, we in no way briefed Paul, so that's a really unfair
Did not
way to
prep you
start
for
it.
that.
But yeah, no,
I wondered if I needed to
You're
say
a natural.
I'm Malky or something.
Yeah, you could have said you're Malky. Malky is not joining us because he has work and children. Lame.
Lame.
But we will drink a toast to him in accordance with tradition. I will remember you.
In the arms of the angels.
That's right, Malky, the late great. But we have with us Paul Northup of Greenbelt, or as we described you on one of our Instagram stories, the Greenbelt Big Dog, which I think, did we call you that the last time we chatted?
You did, yeah. Yeah. And now everyone, like it's the millions, I am referred to as Big Dog. So
excellent.
Thank you for that moniker.
That's great news.
That's amazing. That pleases me greatly. So if you as a listener do not know what Greenbelt is, it's one of our favorite festivals.
I'm surprised you've got this far in your Beer Christianity listenership without figuring out what Greenbelt is. But
super weird that you don't know what it is. But in case this is your first time, yeah, that's all right. Well, let's let Paul explain it. What is Greenbelt?
Greenbelt is a festival of artistry, activism, and belief. It's 50 years old this year. It was founded in the early 70s. It's a place where Christians and not Christians hang out and explore what it means to be human together in festival form.
That's a beautiful summary. And we actually have a listener question that pertains a little bit to that, which would be a good way to go in. But first, we should ask everybody what they're drinking. I think that's very important. Laura, what you drinking?
I'm drinking specifically a elderflower and gin and tonic. That's what it said on the tiny bottle. And the tonic isn't flat, which is a big excitement for this household.
It's beautiful. Love it. Paul, what you drinking?
I'm drinking a glass of red, more specifically a Rioja.
Nice. I went out today and specifically got beer for tonight just so that I could be slightly more traditional than I have been in the last few. And I bought a Brewdog Palm Beach, which feels very kind of Barbie tie-in. Palm Beach Pina Colada New England IPA. So I imagine that's about the angriest a beer purist could be made by a beer.
Feels very festival vibes.
It is very festival vibes. It's also fruity and delightful. So yeah, very good. Although I am scuffing my lipstick, which is unfortunate. But I can redo it. Everything's fine.
It's fine.
Paul, we have a listener question from Kezia. Laura, do you wanna hit that?
Yeah, she very simply asked on Instagram how Greenbelt came about. What is the story?
It's a huge question, obviously.
Yeah, it's a massive question.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of a backstory. I wasn't there, so, I have to just put that out there at the beginning. But I think actually it's quite interesting. It's a good question. Obviously, 50 years old, you have to think about your origin story. I think that to trace it back into the 60s, if I may, and across the pond to America, I know that you two are avid film goers. You've already referenced the Barbie movie. There is at the same time a story about the Jesus people. I don't know if you've watched that or
I have watched the movie. It's lovely.
Yeah, I haven't, but I want to. Well, there's a link there between Greenbelt's origins because I think that, so let's put it this way. Woodstock at the end of the 60s in the States, the peace movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement was a real sort of conscientization moment for a new generation, particularly in the States, but I think it soon infected or spread to Europe. And there was a feeling that festival as form was a new space in which young people, young adults could make meaning and challenge the status quo. I think it's no accident that the Isle of Wight and the Glastonbury Festival were birthed in their modern day forms in the early 70s off the back of that. And at the same time, there was this movement in the States called the Jesus people who were trying to sort of like somehow become more radical or get back to the roots, which I think radical means to go back to the roots. And that was going on. And then this weird hippie sort of touring show called Lonesome Stone came across to Europe and toured around using a double-decker bus, I kid you not, to transport itself from city to city. And essentially it was like an alternative Jesus Christ Superstar or Godspell. It was like a musical of the life of Jesus Christ, performed by Jesus people. And it really was very authentically hippie and off the wall. And I think a bunch of people from Suffolk, and I think it's important that they came from Suffolk, because Suffolk in the late 60s, early 70s, so I'm led to understand, was a place where dissatisfied people from London were moving out of the city to Suffolk to sort of like try and recapture some sort of halcyon notion of what it meant to be free, radical, artistic, creative. And all this stuff came together. Lonesome Stone, the Jesus People, Woodstock, Glastonbury, Isle of Wight, and then this very restless, ambitious crew of people who'd grown up in and around a small Baptist church in Soham in Suffolk. They had grown up in a very particular place at a very particular time, but then they come into this sort of like melting pot, this confluence of other ideas and stuff. Some of them had been to the Isle of Wight festival, and they'd literally thought, come on, there must be more than our just chapel Sunday experience. We've been exposed to these huge sort of movement building moments at these huge festivals. We're seeing what's going on in the world. We're creative, we're artistic, we're restless, we're ambitious. And they met this guy called Jim Palasari, who was one of the prime instigators behind this Lonesome Stone musical. And he said to this crew of people, he said, well, look, one of you owns a farm. And the line that goes down in history is, you've got yourself a farm, you've got yourself a festival. And so nice. These guys literally put on a festival, not at the drop of a hat, but, without really knowing anything about what it meant to put on a festival. Suffolk Police put on 2,000 police for the weekend. Wow. There was all sorts of rumblings in the local community about how cats were going to be kidnapped and strangled, and all sorts of weird going on. Yeah, I don't know, weird. In the end, 2,000 people turned up to the first Greenbelt, and that matched the number of police were there, and that was it. It was born 1974. That's a hugely long and waffly story. As to
in no way. That's fascinating. That's so cool. So was the vibe very much like that kind of Jesus People, Christian Woodstock kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it really was. It really was. It was really DIY. It was really quite ramshackle in a way. It was really free-spirited. It was deeply Christian. But it was really, the form that it took was really informed by and inspired by that whole festival Jesus People movement.
Ramshackle and deeply Christian. I love that's our vibe too. Yeah. We haven't professionalized in the 3 years we've been doing this either.
That's great. I feel like so much of the kind of I don't know, talk or maybe criticism about Greenbelt that we hear from kind of Christians around today is kind of, you talk about it and people are like, oh, Greenbelt, is that even still going? Like, is that still really like Christian anymore? And to have these kind of like really cool kind of alternative, like, as you said, ramshackle but strongly Christian roots. How do you see those still kind of in play in the life of the festival as you see it 50 years later?
Well, I guess I hope that in the same way as those early people who first put on the festival had their eyes and their hearts and their ears open to all that was going on in the world, that's what I hope Greenbelt is still doing today. Now, people perhaps of a more fundamental persuasion or of a more closed Christian understanding might think, well, that's wrong. The Bible tells us to look to the life of Jesus Christ and the scriptures for our framework and our inspiration. And I get that, and I respect it completely. At the same time, my own spirit, my own heart, and I guess the heart of Greenbelt is very much one that is, to simplify it, would be Bible in one hand, newspaper in the other. It's those two things have to belong together in some way if they're to mean anything. And so that's still where Greenbelt's at, really. It's still looking for wherever God's Spirit is at work in the world, we want to join in.
I love that idea of bringing the world and everything that is relevant into the church, because I think, do you get a sense that I don't even want to say it goes by denomination, but I think in most churches, and it's not nearly as bad as it would be in the States, but the lens through which stuff from the outside can get in tends to be quite narrow. And there's a lot of great stuff here in terms of, churches and the Jubilee Let Debt campaign and, fair trade stuff and anti-trafficking stuff. But there's quite a lot that's left out and either not spoken about or actively avoided. Does Greenbelt have a place to kind of compensate for that, or are you hoping to change the churches themselves?
Well, I think we have the luxury of not being a church. I think it must be really hard being a church. Hats off to all those really working away in Christian ministry, week in, week out, leading and pastoring church communities as best that they can. I admire them. I love them, and I want to support them. Greenbelt is not the church, and yet it has a foot firmly planted in the church, but it has its other foot firmly planted in the culture, and it's looking to see, I guess, in the same way that Leslie Newbigin was, I guess it's that church and culture stuff. But I do think you're right, Jonty, that even when the church thinks it's being adventurous or thinks it's being programmatically engaging, and it's investing in different forms of pioneer ministry or fresh expressions, etc., all of which are great and wonderful. I think there are still fairly closed parameters around what is acceptable and what isn't, and what is Christian, inverted commas, and what isn't. And I think that one thing that Greenbelt has always wrestled with, and I wouldn't pretend to say that it's got the answers at all, but it's always wrestled with this notion of a no splits form of worldview, that if your Christianity is to mean anything, it needs to supply you with a lens and a framework with which you can tackle and view and engage with the whole of life, the whole gamut of life. That's not to say that everything is acceptable and good and healthy and helpful. It's not. But it is to say that somehow everything in this messed up world is part of the world which we're called to be part of, to love, to engage in, to be part of, to work within, to witness within. And it's messy. And I'm getting a little bit floppy and vague there, but I guess I'm agreeing with you that to say that often the lens that the church applies to the world is too narrow. And I think there are wonderful expressions of culture, of being human, that are available, that the church doesn't allow itself to tap into and experience, to its own detriment, I think.
And there seems to be a kind of Missio Dei thing going on as well, of Greenbelt isn't just engaging with culture of, hey, anything that's relevant we'll jump into, but you have yourselves a kind of lens of it needs to be artistically interesting, and it needs to be, it doesn't, not it needs to be justice focused. And people who have a lens in their art, in their speaking, in their thinking of making the world better, which necessarily comes with a kind of a narrowing of view, because your fundamentalist church would feel quite differently about what makes the world better from what I think the average Greenbelter would. How has that lens evolved?
It has definitely evolved. I think that, those the first people in the field at Prospect Farm in Suffolk in 1974, it was just the sheer creating of that space was enough. And then
a revolutionary act.
Yeah. That was that. I mean, without that, none of us would be doing what we're doing today and gathering and have felt the huge gift that Greenbelt is in our lives. But I think that then over time, it's, like we make the road by walking. They took the first step, and they didn't know what it was going to be. There wasn't like a creed or a vision statement or a mission statement at all. it was just a hope in their hearts that people would come, and they did. And so then the work begins, I guess, to try and work out, oh, hold on, well, who are we? What are we? Who are we for? And that stuff gradually builds up over time. And so I think that it was only during the 80s, the late 80s and early 90s, that the idea of arts, faith, justice began to bubble to the surface, as if you will. And that suddenly started to, I think, make sense as like a three-stranded cord of almost the DNA of the festival, was that helix of the faith, arts, justice. Somehow what the festival gave privilege and space for had to touch one or more of those three key ingredients. And at its best, it was all of those at the same time. So when, for instance, last year when K Tempest headlined, that was it, smack bang, the helix was complete. The DNA was all there. All the strands came together and all the planets aligned. But that only emerged on time, and it's still fairly haphazard, if I'm honest, the way it all happens. Very rarely written down. Greenbelt has very rarely, if ever, signed up to anything or joined in with anything that would give it sort of like kudos or credential. It's always actually evaded that, not by wanting to be like really awkward and cantankerous, but just because it didn't feel quite right. So I don't know if I'm
nothing wrong with being awkward or cantankerous at all. I mean, it's just a personal mission statement.
Definitely, yeah.
It's that sense of what fits the lens has grown over time, and it's constantly evolving. But I think a year ago, when you kindly had me on as a guest, when I was at an equally tired and fragile state, I said that I think the same spirit still informs what we're trying to do as it did back in that first farm field in 1974. It's just that, the world has changed, we've all changed, and you have to articulate things in different ways and make sense to people in different ways. So you've had to put language around things, but really we're still, we've got a set of words up on our website, which some people call a manifesto. It's like it has this tagline: Greenbelt, somewhere to believe in. And it's a lovely set of words, but would we say it's the set of words that is what Greenbelt? No way, because like almost as soon as we'd written it, we thought, oh well, actually, it's not quite right. So it's constantly changing, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
I feel like, Paul, you touched on a question that we maybe should have asked at the beginning of this podcast, which is, we're a month out from Greenbelt. How are you doing? How are you? Are you okay?
Oh shit! Yeah, we showed a total lack. That is bad.
It's no, I'm doing very, very well, and I'm very grateful to be asked back on by people who value the space that we're trying to make, and it has to be said, do a wonderful job of helping to share it with others. So I'm very, very, very pleased to be here, and it's nice to talk about, rather than what expenses we've agreed or the honorarium that we're giving to X, or did we agree?
Oh, we're getting to that. No.
Travel
further down the agenda when we get to any other business.
I've been on, I think, quite literally about 6.5 hours of calls today about various details like that. So to talk about the broader story is a pleasure. So thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you for making time for us.
Impressed that you have the will to live, never mind be on a podcast. That's
God bless you.
Yeah, God
thank
bless you. That is.
Yeah, and just kind of, looking back at what you were saying about kind of that evolving lens, and just thinking about how people engage with Greenbelt when they're there, and how much people find it. There are people who just find it so refreshing for their faith every time they come around. Do you see Greenbelt becoming bigger than it is, or do you think it's in the right place where it needs to be?
I'd love it to be a little bit bigger than it is, because financially speaking, it's incredibly precarious right now. That's not to set alarm bells ringing. It's just that every festival of our size is incredibly precarious, given the situation that we find ourselves in post-Brexit, post-pandemic, a cost of living crisis, the fact that there are too many festivals. it's a silly thing to go into if you want to do something that's economically viable. So from that point of view, I would love it to be just a little bit bigger. So, these days we've got about 10,000 thereabouts ticketed people at the festival, plus volunteers, etc., etc. The margins that we're working on are tiny. So if we had 1,000 or 2,000 people more, it would make a world of difference to what we were able to do, how sustainable we were able to be. But, even though I might sort of like slightly crave that in my more managerial moments, in my more Justin Welby moments, at the same time, I have to remember that one of our early trustees was the now retired Bishop Graham Cray, who always used to say that part of Greenbelt's character and its spirit was actually shaped and informed by it being incredibly precarious, financially speaking. And so, as a charity, we have certain obligations under the Charity Commission and to our stakeholders and to our angels to run a sustainable ship. And completely, we are committed to that. At the same time, there is something about being precarious, which is strangely helpful in retrospect. At the time when you're living through it, it's just pretty horrid. But I guess what I'm trying to say, I wouldn't want to be comfortable, but it would really help if we had just a few more people buying tickets. But that's a real challenge. That's a real challenge because, putting on a festival is an expensive business. Our production costs have gone through the roof over the last 2 years since coming back after the pandemic. And we can't pass those production costs on to people, not if we want to remain a festival that's accessible to the people who we want to be there. So, we've got huge challenges, but they're, at the same time, it's wonderful, it's exciting, but it is precarious.
Jonty, you're on mute. Promise we have been using Zoom for actually 3 years.
I have used computers, before and stuff. What has the trend been in terms of numbers? Have there been moments? Laura just sent me a message on WhatsApp calling me a mute wanker. Sorry. What has been the trend though? Like, has it just grown and grown and grown, or has it dropped in numbers ever? When the festival became slightly less Christian, did you lose people then? Paul, your face is like, yeah. What has that story been? Yeah,
that's it's ebbed and flowed, and I think you've put your finger on it really. During the 90s. In the 80s, we established ourselves as a really, really safe and reliable place for Christian youth groups to come to in their droves. I mean, we were big in the 1980s. I mean, big. So, if a band played at Reading on August Bank Holiday weekend, the crowd wouldn't look any smaller if they came on to play Greenbelt the day after. 20,000 people camping, up to 30,000 people if you count in day walk-ups and day visitors for acts like Cliff Richard. We were really in the big time then.
Huge rock and roll. To be fair, he was huge.
And he was huge.
Technically rock and roll.
Totally, absolutely. We have to acknowledge that we were big. And I think in the 90s, we became very culturally and politically self-conscious, perhaps in a way that we hadn't quite been before. And, postmodernism was kicking in, and, truth, the notions of truth became very slippery. And I think we became, don't get me wrong, I loved all this about Greenbelt. I was a Greenbelter and I loved it. I loved it that Greenbelt was so cool and avant-garde and alternative. But man, did we shed people coming to the festival, because people want something that's a little bit more obvious, and you know what you're going to get. And you certainly didn't know that at Greenbelt in the 90s. And I think sometimes the risks that we took and the boundaries that we pushed, we did somewhat irresponsibly. And I think we were being a little bit naughty, perhaps. A little bit sort of like, I guess we were into our 20s and we were just rebelling a little bit, and we weren't wanting to be that safe Christian space that everyone could rely on and depend on. The world was too complicated for that anymore. We didn't have time for that. And I think we were increasingly brave, bold, and ambitious in terms of our cultural and artistic engagement. And we made mistakes along the way. And we shed people, gatekeepers didn't look at us and think of us as a safe space anymore. So we lost a lot of groups, group bookings, youth groups in particular. And coupled with that, we were operating in a greenfield site and losing money hand over fist year after year. Less people were coming. We had a couple of disastrously wet August bank holiday weekends. I can remember standing in front of the main stage in Wellingtons and the mud coming over the top of my Wellingtons and going down the inside of the Wellingtons, watching Sneaker Pimps, Three Colors Red, one of the Lamb, one of the best bills I've ever seen at Greenbelt.
That's incredible.
But in a way, it meant everything, but in a way, it meant nothing because there weren't very many people there. It was pissing down with rain. We were losing money, and it wasn't that we'd lost our way. I wouldn't put it like that, because I salute and love the people who were involved in that programming at that stage. I can completely see what they were doing, what they were striving for, and it's so Greenbelt. But I just think we'd lost a sight of a bunch of other stuff where you have to think about who you're trying to take with you on the journey. And so it got very small in the late 90s, to the extent that we had to abandon making a festival in the greenfield site. We were virtually bankrupt. We moved the festival to Cheltenham Racecourse in search of tarmac and flushing toilets and built-in electricity and other infrastructure. And understandably, that was a huge culture shock. I mean, how can you have a festival, a Christian festival, that's trying to model this kingdom perspective, this alternative way of being and living and loving, while there was tote and betting signage everywhere you looked? Yeah. It was, it was an anathema. It was horrific to a lot of people, aesthetically, culturally, spiritually. But it was essential. It was essential because we were going to lose the festival. We should have lost the festival, by rights. There was no money in the bank. And were it not for people phoning around each other and saying, well, could you remortgage your house? Could you give us a loan or a promise of X amount of money? Yeah, okay, I could. And somehow the festival limped through. And the first year at Cheltenham, 2,000 people, the same as the first year, 1974 at Prospect Farm. The festival should have died. It should have, that should have been it. And that's what we describe as the festival's near-death experience. It saw the white light at the end of the tunnel. And that really focused things, I think, for people thinking, we can't let this thing die. It's meant too much to too many people, and we want it to be here for our children. So I think a whole bunch of people just really pulled out all the stops, financially, practically, spiritually, whatever way you think of it. And the festival then sort of rebirthed itself in a sense and grew and grew and grew. And over the next few years at Cheltenham Racecourse, rediscovered that it could still be Greenbelt Festival in a different place, in a slightly different form. But it grew rapidly again, right the way back up to sort of 17, 18, 19, 20,000 people by 2010. So that's a remarkable curve of growth from going into the millennium, the turn of the millennium. We should have just packed up our bags. But 10 years later, we were in rude health again. We were at Cheltenham and we walked slightly into the fact that Cheltenham Racecourse was redeveloping. We got called into a meeting on the eve of the 2013 festival, and we got told, you can come back, but we're redeveloping this whole racecourse, and we're making it into a high-end conferencing and events facility. And you have to think, would your community-led, volunteer-led event, would it really fit in our high-end banqueting and event facility? Well, we didn't say anything, but we thought, no, not really.
Not quite the vibe, yeah.
So without telling us to leave, we were left with no option to not come back to the racecourse, and we had to find another site. And whenever you move, and Greenbelt's moved 7 times over its 50-year period, you lose audience because people become accustomed to going to Greenbelt in one place. So we lost a lot of audience. We moved to Boughton House. We lost all our money again. We were bankrupt again. And so we had to start again. And we've been about and we've seen gradual incremental growth, but tiny little baby steps. And so that's the ebb and the flow. I really am talking too much.
You're literally the guest on a podcast.
You're fine.
It's your one job. Like, don't worry about it. I was just thinking, the first time I went must have been in, I think, 2005, 2006 in Cheltenham. And I did find the racecourse thing weird, but I got over it so quickly. And I wonder if there's a thing there of, at the time, that would probably be anathema to the spirit of, like you say, of what Greenbelt was. There's still very kind of a lot of very kind of traditional Christians going there, and it's a gambling venue, and it's just a kind of weird thing. Now that Greenbelt is a far more, to my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, but left-wing, progressive, a lot of revolutionary kind of thinking goes on there. And maybe that's just the tracks that I'm going to, but you're on the grounds of one of the largest landowners in the country.
Listening to Nick Hayes last year on the grounds of Borden House was interesting.
But I love that tension, actually, because that's the facts, right? We're in Babylon. You can't just pretend that capitalism and feudalism's, whatever dregs don't exist. And maybe the tension is good or not. Or is the tension just annoying? I don't know. Or do you not feel it at all? Also, this may be a trap. I'm so sorry. Don't answer it if you don't want to.
Jonty, you're talking too much.
Sorry.
It's a really good question. So we move away from a shrine to betting to a lovely greenfield site, and everyone thinks, yes, we've cracked that one. No, frying pan fire. Like, as you quite rightly say, the Duke of Buccleuch, whose land we're on, and you heard Nick Hayes at the festival last year, is the second largest landowner in Europe in terms of land ownership and feudalism and all that sort of stuff, particularly in Scotland, where there is still in anyway. But and it's a tension. It's a huge tension. It's morally very, very difficult. I like to think that Greenbelt at its best does that thing that the protesters outside St. Paul's did. Like, we occupy, we transform a space for a period of time. We occupy it, we take it over, and we bring a different set of values to bear in that space. I'm going to get old Walter Wink on you, but I think there are powers and principalities, and I think that what we do together as communities of faith make a difference to atmospheres, to powers. And I'm not for a minute going to claim that by Greenbelt being at Boughton House, we are eroding and bringing down the landed gentry system in the country. But I think we're asking questions about it in a slightly playful and polite manner, or as Nick Hayes said, that with whimsy, which like he named as the greatest British attribute, which I really liked.
Absolutely.
So but it's a really good question, Jonty. Wherever we go, like if we ever moved in the future back to sort of like an agricultural showground or to an event complex or something, there's always going to be, capitalism, it's the water in which we swim, and it's on the one hand, it's deeply regrettable, but I don't know, that's a huge, big thing.
You could always just remember that Rage Against the Machine were on Sony, like that's not a, like you're fine. You're in very good company. And that kind of criticism of the festival would always feel to me like, and yet you have an iPhone, and yet you participate in modern society. I am very intelligent, like it's just like, it's a nonsense argument against it. But I think the tension may actually in some way be useful. When you went all super spiritual, I wanted to ask you something since last year's event, which, like, it was the festival. There's stuff that you like, there's stuff that you don't like. I was still camping, which I loathe every time I do it. And I clamp, and I still loathe it. And, and the toilets give me pain in my psyche, and like all of that kind of stuff. And I came away on something much better than that, youth group away weekend high, or your Christian festival high, or, what Christian conference high that they talk about. Something that lasted longer, that was more transformative, that did more for me spiritually, and to sound a little bit like Walter, like I felt like I came under attack, as a direct result and promptly gave in because that's the kind of guy I am. But like, I felt like there is something spiritual happening at Greenbelt, and it's not. I don't know how you could program for it. I don't know how you could design for it. You've definitely made space, but do other people talk to you about that? About like it was. I don't know if last year was like this for everybody, but for me, it was honestly transcendent. And I didn't even notice while it was happening. But when I came back, I was a different person. It was healing. It was just stunning. Do you get that kind of feedback? And do you think there's something spiritual going on without wanting to drag you into a Pentecostal tent? But like, it feels like it is.
I do feel that. Yeah. And I'd be happy to admit it. I'd be happy to tell you that I wouldn't do what I did if I didn't believe that sort of stuff was going on at the festival. I don't know how it happens. I don't control it. I don't make it happen. I'm not part of making it happen, but it does. And what you're saying to me is extremely overwhelming, and I find it really, really moving, Jonty. And I have conversations with people year round who say similar things to me, and that's been my experience too, and that's why I'm involved. And I know that on I don't want this to be a big lurch, but I know that on your podcast you've been digging into the whole legacy around Mike Pilavachi. And I played in a band in the 1990s that would parachute into big events. Before we graduated and learned how to play in proper pubs and clubs and on the proper music scene, we would parachute into these big parachurch events. Soul Survivor a few years in a row. And we would get asked to play at these after hours events. And we'd arrive into these big, sort of almost like aircraft hangar agricultural sheds where there had been a praise and worship meeting earlier on in the evening. And I tell you what, I wrote a song about it. You don't need to Google this or look it up, but I tried to process what was going on at the time, because as a band, we felt alien coming into these spaces. Something had been going on, and it didn't feel quite right, if I'm really, really honest. And, should a whole bunch of people spoke up at the time? Yes, of course we should. But we're not part of those networks. It wasn't our place to, et cetera, et cetera. But something felt a bit off. And we would then get asked to play a gig to a bunch of teenagers who were already emotionally wrecked, absolutely wrecked. And sometimes that wasn't great, if I'm honest. And I really struggled with that and built up a reputation for really sort of like being a little bit mouthy and being unhelpful with the stuff I was saying between songs, because there was just something that I was really deeply uncomfortable about. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that at those events, Soul Survivor and others, where there was this amazing quote unquote work of the spirit going on, and I get and I totally accept and respect that for a lot of people, those experiences were formative and still energize and a part of their story today. And that's important. There was good things that were sown and embedded. But I guess the contrast I want to make is then in my band, we'd bowl up every now and again at Greenbelt, and there wasn't this sort of like hype. There wasn't this weird emotional stuff going on. But every time we came away, even if we'd had to bomb in, do a gig, and then go on somewhere else to do another gig, we were left talking about it for months afterwards, because there was something there that felt more solid somehow. On the one hand, it was more ephemeral because it wasn't written down or described or advertised, or you weren't told what was happening as you were at these other events. But on the other hand, it was more solid and it was more lasting. And in the same way as you're describing, Jonty, it changed us. And I thought, there's something here. And even when I went along as an 18-year-old in 1984, there was something there that felt solid. I can't, and it's weird because we don't set out to do that. We're at pains to say we're not a worship and teaching conference, and we're not. We're just trying to make room. And when you make room, and you hopefully do something with goodwill, and you know, God tends to show up, I guess. But not that God shows up, God's already there, and you just make room for that to be apparent.
Yeah, it's perhaps a cheap shot, but at a time when you guys were being perceived as less safe, a whole bunch of quite not safe stuff was happening, which is unfortunate. And that kind of thing will, I think, accelerate the growing trend of deconstruction within the church, which can be, to me anyway, just as irritating as the fundamentalists, but such an important work. Laura's laughing at me just because she hears me bitching when we're not on the podcast about it. But that's got to be, this is such a crass way of putting it, but that deconstruction crowd has got to be a growth, market for you guys. Like, I know so many people who have never come to Greenbelt and I've asked them in the past and they've said, yeah, no, it's not really my thing, and this year they're coming for the first time, some of them. And I don't think it's like because you guys are, putting adverts in the paper saying disillusioned with the church. Well, fuck them guys and come to our festival. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not, you're not doing that, but people know what the vibe is. And they're suddenly realizing at a whole bunch of stuff that they used to be frightened of because people were critical of it because it wasn't orthodox enough or it wasn't towing the line enough. They're like, oh, but a whole bunch of that was bullshit. So maybe then we try that out. And they hear from people like us who go there and have this transformative experience and go, well, maybe we'll give it a shot. I could see that becoming, because Greenbelt was already a place for those people, right? It's just that there's more of them now. Does that give you a new responsibility? Again, you've studiously avoided becoming a church, which is smart, but do you feel that? Do you feel the weight of people who are coming in who've been hurt by other parts of the church who are now like, yeah, this is where I'm safe. And they're like, cool, no pressure.
Yeah. I think Greenbelt's always been that space. I think you're right to say that everyone who has felt a refugee from the church for whatever reason could have found a space, a home at Greenbelt. Is that even more the case now? I guess yes. Do we advertise that or set out to diss the church in the hope of winning more audience? No. But yeah, I mean, we are that space for people to come and decompress and to deconstruct and try and unravel what it is that hasn't worked for them, that has done them damage. I think there is space at Greenbelt for people to do that. Is that pastorally very scary? Yes, it is. Do we need to do work around that? Probably yes, because I think you're right. I mean, chronologically speaking, it's a huge and horrible irony because so many people have been hurt that at the very, as you said, Jonty, the very time when Greenbelt was being perceived as not the safe place to be from a theological point of view, and people were mining back into what was perceived to be the trustworthy place to be. I don't want to make any spiritual capital out of that at all. I feel very, very sad about that and conflicted about it. Yeah. That's a really big one. I don't know how to get into that.
Yeah, and to be fair, that, as I say, it's a bit of a cheap comparison to make, I guess. But yeah, it is just when you said you weren't perceived as safe, the irony is just, yeah. Although I've got to say, like, I have gone from being at Greenbelt at Belt Green, at Belt Green. I have found my faith getting stronger from a place where it had gone quite like, I wonder if I'm anywhere near, believing as hard as I used to, yeah, coming back in a weird kind of post evangelical, kind of way. So I don't know if that's encouraging or horrifying. But, yeah, it's
definitely the former.
We had, as you pointed out earlier, and you've also kind of touched on this a little bit anyway, we had a question from a listener that came in after we had recorded the previous episode. So we thought, hey, let's kind of segue into this one. Why not? We had a question from Jenny who asks, what can people do with their kind of conversion or spiritual experiences that they've had at these kind of bigger festivals that you've mentioned? when they've seen leaders have these big fall from grace or had these big festivals almost fall from grace, what do people do with the experiences they've had there? It's a big question again.
Yeah. I'm really hopelessly underqualified to try and answer this, but the sorts of things I would say is, so I was part of a massive youth group that came to Greenbelt first in the early 80s. Before that, we'd had these incredibly ecstatic experiences amongst ourselves of what you might call moves of the spirit, where we'd literally been worshipping all night, and it, all those sorts of experiences, which I'm guessing you both might have been a part of at times in your Christian formation and your Christian experience. And part of me is completely weirded out by that. Part of me completely loves that happened. And I don't know if we can do the work formally as Greenbelt, but I would hope that people can sort of, it's almost like, I want to sort of almost describe it in hierarchical terms. So, let's name names, like the Mike Pilavachi thing. There was a very hierarchical thing going on there. There was the leader, the focus of attention, the channel. But I think that there's a huge amount of the work of the Spirit that goes on amongst the people. The work of when I read the Bible more regularly, I was better at it. I used to have this idea of this like glib phrase that I used to say that God spoke much more to people than he spoke to individuals. And I think there is this sense of in community, I think it's important not to abandon community with one another in working this stuff through, I guess, in terms of being hugely betrayed and let down, abused by one person, a leader, a hierarchical figure. Don't throw out everything that happened in and amongst you as people, as friends together, as community, because there will undoubtedly still be immense value and meaning in that, which you should not abandon and is not bad. I don't know if I'm making any sense. From my own youth work experience, the whole bunch of us, we grew up, there was like we would meet on a Sunday night and sometimes there was 100 of us there in a small Baptist church. And we still meet each other every now and again, those of us who still live locally. And there's this second glance, you look at each other and you think, what the fuck happened there?
Yeah.
And it's a little bit weird. And part of it is not good, but part of it was good. Part of it was really good.
Yeah.
And it's somehow finding the tools and the people to separate the wheat from the chaff and work out what was good. Because there's good there. There's good in Soul Survivor. No doubt about it. And I know there's loads of stuff out there about people tracking this all through. And it's hugely painful. It's heartbreaking. But there is good there as well as complete shit.
And beyond the abuse, there's entire kind of church styles or traditions or whatever that have, for anyone who's deconstructing, they might feel, well, that's done a lot of harm. And I wonder if there's hope for a lot of people to get to the point where we can see the good that was in there and that kind of very Christian self-understanding, humility, I don't know, to go like, if I'm imperfect and God could work through me, then maybe we don't have to write off everything because this church was run by a bunch of douchebags. God could still have been in there among the douchebags, which I believe is a straight translation of scripture. That's like straight up from the Greek.
Totally. Yeah, here's to the douchebags. I mean, from the very beginning, however you read the Bible, however
they're all douchebags. Like every single one of them. Like acting surprised is,
I mean,
yeah. So this festival, all right, it's turning 50, a big moment. Are you going to do that big festival thing of release the details of a surprise guest that you haven't put in the lineup so far? And if so, do you want to just drop it here? Nobody listens to this podcast anyway, and you can see, let us know. Let us have the scoop.
If you have a burden laying on your shoulders, we can take up that yoke.
Just between us girls, that's fine. We can do that. That's all right.
Well, apart from the fact, obviously, Bono will be there.
Naturally, yeah. And the Pope.
Oh, and Cliff Richard.
Yeah. The Holy Trinity. No, we don't. We don't. No, seriously, we don't have any secrets to unveil. We're trying to resist being too backslappy and nostalgic, although we're doing a little bit of that.
I think you've earned it.
Yeah. But I think, we're much more wide-eyed and concerned about how we face the future, or even live in the present. So no secret, no surprises.
Okay,
no
can I just
fireworks?
So no Rammstein performance. That'd be amazing. Okay, but do you know what has made me the happiest in many years is that you're going to have Ezra Furman there. I love Ezra Furman. I love Ezra Furman more than I love Laura. I love Ezra Furman so much. It's I'm so delighted, and I'm blown away that you got them. That's so freaking cool. And also, one of the greatest live shows I've ever seen was Ezra Furman a few years ago. Just incredible. So
I'm so pleased to hear you say that, because we've wanted Ezra for quite a good while. I love Ezra Furman. I particularly love Ezra Furman. One Christmas, they were standing in for someone on Six Music, and they were essentially DJing a show. And I thought, this person is so Greenbelt.
Right.
Sort of unutterably Greenbelt through and through.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that now Ezra's going to be, closing out the 50th festival. So I'm glad you're pleased.
Faith, art, and justice there, at every level, in every album, just so good. So if you're listening to this and you haven't listened to Ezra Furman, you should do that. You should also buy your tickets for Greenbelt, the 50th anniversary. Can you tell us the dates and the website and all the places people can go?
Yeah, thank you. It's greenbelt.org.uk for all details, lineup, tickets, essential information. Our dates are actually Thursday arrivals this year. That's a bit of a change if you're a regular Greenbelter. It's from Thursday, the 24th of August through to Sunday, the 27th of August. Departures on Monday, the 28th of August. So it's August bank holiday weekend.
Nice.
It's
great.
Easy.
I feel like you guys have been explaining that a lot on all the communications, and I'm just I don't are people really not getting this?
They're not.
Well, people are averse to change. Christians, who knew? Weird.
Big shock.
Hey, we got some more questions that we do want to give you the opportunity to answer from our listeners. So in a quick fire round.
I mean, I think you may have already answered the first one, which is from a different Jenny, who says, who's your most exciting booking this summer? Which
I think it's Ezra Furman.
Ezra.
Damn right it is.
And another amazing question from Kenny, which says, if you could have your own Jules Holland later session, who would be your 5 artists / bands to play at said gig? They can be alive or dead. I love it.
Question.
Oh my word.
On the spot.
My word. So, because we're 50, I'm going to be indulgent, and I'm just going to quote at you people who have appeared, musicians who've been at Greenbelt before.
Nice.
So I'd have Mavis
this is Greenbelt's Jules Holland later.
Straight from the mouth of the big dog.
Yeah, exactly. Barking from the mouth of the big dog. I'd have Mavis Staples. Nice. I'd have Michael Franti.
Nice.
I think I would have. Do you know what? I'm going to be really a little bit sentimental here. I would have Martin Joseph.
Yeah.
I really would. He's been amazing. He's sort of almost grown up through and with the festival, and now he brings us amazing acts, and he's just amazing. So he's number 3. I'd have K Tempest.
Nice.
And there's so many. See, I like really good fun live bands like Hot 8 Brass Band, who we've had, Ozomatli. But I think I would circle back again to Ezra Furman, because I've never seen Ezra play live. Jonty has. Others that I have say it's amazing.
Wonderful.
So I'm going to act of faith. I'm going to put Ezra on as my fifth one.
We love it.
Claim it.
Yeah.
And it shall be so.
Awesome. Oh, Paul, that's superb. Thank you so much for taking the time at this very stressful time of your life or your year or whatever in order to come and talk to us.
Like Father Christmas on Christmas Eve.
We're looking forward to seeing the festival, and we're looking forward to seeing listeners there. Listeners, we are going to do some kind of meetup in the Jesus Arms at some point so we can hang out and chat and,
We'll let you know.
We'll let you know. Basically.
Details to follow.
Basically, we need to work out who we're going to be interviewing and also who's playing, because I am not missing Ezra Furman to meet you. Love you as I do. So,
and now that you've heard us all gushing about it, why would you want to?
Yeah, exactly.
They're better than us.
Yeah. Alrighty. Thanks so much for listening. And you can find the rest of our stuff at beerchristianity.co.uk. You can find us on Twitter. Don't find us on Twitter, actually, no. But, Insta and stuff. And you can message us, beerchristianity@yahoo.com, and ask us questions, suggest guests, all that kind of stuff. We've got 2 very interesting trans guests coming up over the next few episodes as well. So, if you have questions or comments or things that you'd like to discuss or ask, then please let us know. And thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.